Welcome. So glad you tuned in on Leap of Faith as we explore Ethos. Ethos is about the characteristic spirit of our Catholic culture. It is about trust, credibility, authority. We partner with the University of Dayton as we seek to explore critical issues of our church that help us to broaden our perspective and reimagine our faith. Take the leap with us. Explore the religious imagination. Welcome to Ethos. Our theme is Going, Gone. And it's based on a research study with that same name entitled Going, Gone, the Dynamics of Disaffiliation in Young Catholics. This study was conducted by the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate of Georgetown and St. Mary's Press in the US. And the study sought to explore an all too chillingly familiar question: why are young people leaving the Catholic Church? On Ethos today, we want to deep dive into this topic. So with us, we have a distinguished team of panelists who will help us navigate this very complex issue. So without more, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have Martha Saurine. She is a University of Dayton grad and is currently a theology teacher and director of campus ministry and youth ministry at Carroll Catholic High School in Dayton, Ohio. Martha, welcome. Then we have Dr. William Portier. He has written and lectured on the rise of Evangelical Catholics and an unaffiliated young people in the church. He is a retired but active retiree of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Dayton. He brings a breadth and depth of research and is well recognized. He's a well-recognized historical theologian around the world. So welcome, Dr. Portier. And then we have Mark Mann. He has been a diocesan director of youth ministry for many years and is now working with the Paulist religious community, organizing programs, etc., with young adults. And last but not least, we have Sister Angela Ann Zukowski. She has collaborated with the Caribbean School for Catholic Communications, CRADI, Living Water Community, and various dioceses throughout the Caribbean. She's a Department of Religious Studies professor, specializing in pastoral and catechetical ministry courses. Sister Angela Ann, welcome. So welcome to all four of you all. Let's begin with our research from Going, Gone. Now, this study surveyed and interviewed younger and older millennials, that's between the ages of 18 and 33 years, who once identified as Catholic but no longer consider themselves Catholic. The Pew Research Center puts the number of disaffiliated American young millennials, that's the 18 to 24 range, at 36%, and disaffiliated older millennials, that's the 25 to 33 age group, at 34%. Now, the term disaffiliated or religious nuns, and that's N-O-N-E-S, are used to describe this population that for various reasons no longer consider themselves Catholic. So let's take a look at some of our charts. Now, in this first chart, we see that the 13 to 17 age group seems quite high at 39%. So Martha, let's start with you. The Pew Research Center reports that the percentage of Americans who are religiously unaffiliated continues to jump. For us in the Caribbean, sadly, the story is the same. We see it in our parishes. So what is your observation and experience?
Yeah, we see it as well. So I'm in the high school, but also going to church on Sunday, I see a lot of empty pews. So a lot of our students still identify as Catholic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're attending church. And again, that's really obvious when you go on Sunday. But just like from previous research, we know this isn't just a youth issue, right? That a lot of them mirror the beliefs and practices of their parents. So I think it's a wider issue than just youth. So in the classroom, I see a clash of or a conflict, maybe would be a better way to name it, between their Catholic faith and a lot of the issues in their life. And I think they're trying to come to terms with it. And I think a lot of times our Catholic faith is misunderstood. Social media, there's a lot of church bashing, not just the Catholic Church, but religion in general. And so I think they're trying to reconcile what it means to have a faith, but yet deal with the world and the issues. But there is some good news. We still fill our retreats. We still have leaders that want to lead these retreats and tell their stories. We still have a thriving service that kids sign up to do that. So it tells me that the search for truth, meaning, and purpose is alive and well, that there is a desire for that. So that's a lot to go on. That's really good news. And, to get into their, what it means to be relational. So my experience is relationships must come first, and then all else it makes it easier. So I concur with the experience that of the research and your experience that you've shared.
Yes, thank you so very much, Martha. So as you said, some conclude that religious affiliation and faith in God are nonsensical and reject all such beliefs. Others seek a different faith expression or religious practice that better aligns with what they believe or how they desire to express their sense of spiritual life. So, Mark, what is your experience in listening to and ministering with the nuns?
Anecdotally, the young adults that I've met that would consider themselves non-affiliated, they still have a respect for the church, especially those who are previously Catholic or identify as Catholic. For them, belonging to the church taught them how to be good people, right? As a baseline, they would say that. But something happened along the way, and I know we'll explore that a little bit more here in our conversation. But as I've talked with the young adults I know, it was not so much about answers, but about care and belonging. That they just weren't cared for when there was a crisis in their life at the time, whether it was a parent's divorce or an illness in the family, or certainly during 2009 with the recession, the number of young people that were thrust into poverty at that time. And where was the church? Where was their church? They asked. I know, though, of the young adults that I've met, I would use the phrase that they're still, in a way, deeply Catholic. They don't identify as Catholic anymore, but in talking with them, you get to have this keen sense of justice that I would name as Catholic. They have a worldview that I would say is sacramental. They may not use those words, but there's this identity that's deeper than just what they articulate that really resonates with a Catholic upbringing, you could say that. But like all of us, and I think Martha said it, it's not just youth and young adults that are confronted by some of the phenomenon that are happening today. It's all of us, such as globalization, right? If we define globalization as the compression of time and space, we can find out things that are happening in the world within minutes. Young people are connected to one another in a way they were never connected to before, through the internet and through social media, and are able to find people who are like-minded, right? And to explore further these answers. We're here in the United States. I know that we are, one of the phenomenon or dynamics going on is this sharpness of polarization that's happened today. And young people are dealing with that no differently than the rest of the country, and finding people who are like-minded, like-hearted to them. So that's been some of my own experience, in that there are that they would still see themselves as spiritual. They still have a love of ritual. In fact, some have their own ceremony, you could say, even though they wouldn't identify in any particular organized religion.
Religion, exactly. That's exactly what I'm going to say, Mark, because we often hear young people saying they're spiritual but not religious. And this next chart that we're going to look at seems to confirm that. Dr. Portier, why do a growing number of young Catholics choose to dissociate or be unaffiliated with any religion?
That's such an easy question. So the first thing that I can say is that this trend toward religious disaffiliation is very complex, so that gets me off the hook, right? It's subject to analysis from many different perspectives, so it's not just something that's happening to Catholics. Trust for all institutions, such as government and business, and the military is the big exception, has hit a shockingly low point. Religious disaffiliation is part of the larger dynamics of this decline of belonging that we have in a voluntary culture of choice. It's kind of a paradox. You get to choose anything, but you really want to belong to things. I think Mark said that. But so your question is, why do they leave churches? In the 2000s, the first decade, Barna did a survey that identified 4 words that nuns use to describe organized churches. The 4 words are judgmental, hypocritical, homophobic, and too political. These words reflect the 3rd phase of what Putnam and Campbell in American Grace called the shock and 2 aftershocks. So the shock was the 60s. The first aftershock was the rise of the religious right. And at the millennium, we had the kind of rejection of the religious right, which these 4 words reflect. So, but the 4 words, as we have been saying, suggest that disaffiliation is not some kind of hard secular ideology. Young people just don't think that churches always treat people very well, and so they distrust them. I enjoyed teaching nuns when I taught. They often craved the spiritual riches of Christianity, especially its power to make the extraordinary people that we call saints what might make one inclined to accept its often difficult seeming beliefs and rules, which is what the church usually leads with, alas. So as Evangelii Nunciandi might put it, the best evangelists are witnesses.
Exactly. So you see, you're leading us to say that both ecclesial and societal factors, therefore, were found to negatively impact participation in organized religion, leading in authors identifying 3 broad categories of former Catholics. That's the injured, the drifter, and the dissenter. So the injured is someone who's had a negative familial or ecclesial experience. As Dr. Portier told us just now, the drifter is someone with uncertain faith and lack of engagement with a faith community. And the dissenter is someone who actively rejects or resists the church and her teachings. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, an international religious leader and philosopher who is deeply interested in the role of postmodern religion, notes that all persons long for connection in a generative community. Now, community, he notes, is that place where they know who you are and where they miss you when you are gone. And that treatment factor is something that all our panelists have spoken to so far. So Martha, have we lost that in our Catholic communities?
I would say yes and no. I read this question and I just think of a time when I sent my kids to kindergarten. The first day of school, there's Father Dave on the front steps of the school. He knew every kid's name, every kid. Today, that's not so. I don't have a kindergartner anymore, but and not to judge the priests today, they're overwhelmed. People aren't going to church like they used to. I guarantee all those kids that Father Davey knew the name, he saw them on Sundays. So it's different. It looks different. Years ago, the church was the center of community. That's not the case anymore. But I look at our school, and I think we're not unique in the sense that you look at something like band. They have their own community. It's very strong. Athletics, they have a very strong community. Drama, very strong community. So I have a new position, and part of that is mission. So one of the things is to make sure that our faith is integrated into all of those communities, that we are one, but to respect their own communities, their own interests, in what that looks like. We started a house system where we break down a larger community into smaller communities. And what that is, it says you matter, you belong, everyone has something to contribute, you're safe here. All of those things, like not feeling valued, not feeling loved, not having a sense of belonging, those are all community killers. And so what we've heard is that the church may not be doing the best job of creating that. So, but I think in the school setting, so fortunate to work in a place where family atmosphere is so strong, and that we can live that out in our school community. So I think, yes, it's different in the parishes. It's not going to be like it was 20 years ago, but there are opportunities to make that happen, and we have to just adapt and learn how to do that.
Yes, and breaking down the faith, as you say, into almost cell groups where you really feel and are treated with love. So, Dr. Portier, you have written extensively about evangelical Catholics. You stated in one of your articles that the future of the church in the United States is both evangelical and Catholic. So is this an alternative to the disaffiliation within our parishes? I think you're still on mute. I'm not hearing you.
Now?
Right, I am.
Okay, so I wrote that in 2004. So Natasha, I'm glad that someone is still reading it. Sociologically, I was trying to be provocative, right, saying this to Catholics. Sociologically, evangelical means voluntary or intentional. That's its primary meaning. Religiously, it means witnessing to the gospel, and it suggests an outward-looking mission over maintenance kind of attitude. I grew up in a thick Catholic subculture. This formation blinded many of my generation to the voluntary character of religious faith in the United States. It protected us from the dynamics of religious pluralism, which is what we're talking about now. Religious liberty means voluntarism, choice. You get to pick. Choice means pluralism, and pluralism with its fluid landscape almost requires an evangelical style. We must either evangelize or die, and we have no right to expect that our children will grow up to be Catholic in this culture. Back in 2004, I had great hopes that evangelical Catholics, these were these on fire, as they would say, students that I had been teaching and who had chosen Catholicism and were strongly committed. They were the minority of my students, but they were powerful. I had hoped that they would be a spirit-filled leaven in our parishes to help renew the church. But unfortunately, I was assuming what I would call the post-war consensus and its big tent church that I grew up in. But the world was changing fast. In 2006, Facebook opened for general use. In 2007, Apple began selling smartphones. Then in 2008, journalist Bill Bishop wrote The Big Sort. With census data and election demography, Bishop showed that US citizens were geographically clustering into like-minded groups. They actually lived in these places. Just as Bishop had described, Catholics too were gravitating toward other Catholics who were just like them. So that meant that evangelical Catholics and the old people were not going to be in the same parish. Parishes were self-selected. But this is not a first for the church. In fact, the post-war big tent church of my youth is more the exception than what we have now. So what should we do? My suggestion is that we should listen to the Pope. I got really excited when Pope Francis started talking about a church that goes forth. And then he called Evangelii Nunciandi, which I had been teaching for years, the church's greatest pastoral document. So what we need is a field hospital church that's this non-judgmental accompanying is Pope Francis's word for all this stuff we've been talking about, evangelical ethos that he embodies. So the church's future, to answer your question, is still evangelical and Catholic, but unbridled pluralism makes it just so much more complicated. So I would say that our hope is to imbibe Pope Francis's witness.
Which is positive religious formation. So Mark, what factors therefore can contribute to this positive religious formation among Catholics today?
The factors are, as Dr. Portier pointed out, in terms of disaffiliation is complicated. I think it's equally as complicated in terms of what are the factors that really contribute. But Martha hinted at it about being seen, being known, when her pastor was greeting all the kindergartners.
Yes, by name.
By name. But I think it also starts at home. And not just in the single household, but the wider family, the parents, grandparents, godparents, aunts, uncles, all the people who have a stake in the life of children and passing on this faith, that it's more about formation. And it's a community of adults who are together in prayer and express care through service that is attractive to young people today. So I'm part of a national initiative through the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry that is looking at how we strengthen the relationship between parents, grandparents, and godparents and parish ministry leaders to help foster a sense of partnership. Yes. Because we're all working on the same thing at the same time. We just might be doing it with different strategies.
True, which is to
so
share
that's
love.
One.
Yes.
Yeah. I'd also make reference to Pope Francis, that in the Synod on Young People, there was this idea of people of reference, being people of reference. And that certainly came out when we were doing our own listening sessions with young people here in our diocese, that with all the information that's out there, the unbridled pluralism that Dr. Portier pointed to, young adults and young people, middle school youth especially, who are the trusted adults, who are the people they can rely on to help them understand and make sense of that intersection of faith and life. And I say let their questions lead. Let young people find their own voice. Pope Francis, in reflecting on the Synod, talks about the different images of youth that are in the Bible, and he references Gideon and Gideon's brashness in speaking with God. And maybe we need to be just as welcoming of young people's brashness today, because they are still seeking faith.
Yes.
And it's faith seeking understanding. But the last thing I would say is that one of the things we also heard in our Synod process was there are plenty of off-ramps. If the church is like a highway, young people are finding plenty of off-ramps from church life because we're not making room. So what are those organizational on-ramps What are the ways that we can help draw young people into meaningful participation in the life of their church, in the life of their own parish community,
Yes.
where they can express their gifts side by side with adults?
So I'll actually ask Martha that. How do parish leaders, Martha, ministers, catechists, teachers engage in religious faith formation in light of all these evolving cultural contexts that we experience in our religion today?
I think that's an interesting question. I think we walk a tightrope of respecting tradition while being innovative and relevant. So I think we have to make things relevant. So whenever I taught, it was always about, yeah, here's this beautiful church teaching, but what does it mean to your life?
Yes.
And I think that is so important, because I think people need to know that this does make a difference. It makes a difference in your life, how you live your life, the integrity which you live your life. Can you be a good person without religion? Of course you can. But can you live it with that deep meaningfulness? Does it add to it? Absolutely. Yes. So I think the value of, and they don't want a list of don'ts. They don't want a list of rules.
No.
They want meaning.
Yes.
Well, and I think it is. And just because, we deal with the issues, we talk about the tough questions, we have to address those tough questions. We have to be willing to put ourselves on the line and be open to hearing and listening, like Mark said, and kind of try to resolve some of that conflict that they're feeling.
Right. So, yes, just what you're saying, Martha. Thank you for that word, listening, because Sister Angela, I have not forgotten you. We haven't left you out of the conversation. I'm leaving your wisdom now for last, because like Martha said about listening, that was the concept in our synodality conversations. So in our own local synthesis that emerged from our local archdiocese, we saw strengthening youth engagement, faith formation, and hospitality. So if we manage to make those changes, will we see a return of the lost sheep?
Okay, well, probably the lost sheep is a concern for me. I don't think that they're lost. I think they're in our midst.
Okay.
And I think that's what we need to celebrate. We have a lot of young, youthful energy, but on so many different age levels. And they are waiting for us to be church, as we've talked about Evangelii Nunziante and talking about Evangelii Gaudium, that those kind of spirits are there. So how do we do? I think synodality is the call to open the doors, to ensure that young people and those who are really want to be involved in the church have a place in the church. It's that we welcome them. As we began the program, we open our doors and we welcome them. It's a place where they know that we know their name, we know who they are, and how they can be incorporated. It is so simple. It is not complex. Sometimes we create too many programs. We become programitist. We create a program to make something happen, and it's basically a theology of presence. It's being present to one another, opening our hearts and minds. That's what synodality is, of how to be church in a new way in the 21st century.
Yes, thank you so very much, sister. Really, I love that. So we really hope, viewers, that this conversation has helped to demystify the dynamics of religious disaffiliation. And if all of us today on our panel, and myself as host, if we had to retheme today's show based on all our discussions, we would say going, coming back. So thank you for looking at Ethos, and we'll see you again.